In the 1920s, Cambodia was a deeply spiritual nation, where every local man had to spend at least a year in a monastery. Because so much of the land was regularly flooded, many houses were built on stilts.
This is eternal Cambodia. If you tell me that this image was took yesterday, I would believe you, because this is the traditional Cambodia as it always was.
This unusual photograph shows a Cambodian official working in the French colonial service.
These
photographs give you a feeling of the transitional quality of things in Cambodia, in this period between modernity and tradition. You can see some modern elements, the hat, the moustache, the bow tie, but he's also dressed in Cambodian style with his sampot trousers. The interesting thing is the way it's all mixed up.
Cambodia had neither the raw materials nor the population of Vietnam, so it couldn't generate huge sums of money for France. But it did possess one of the glories of Indochina, the temple complex of Angkor. Built by the ancient kings of Cambodia, Angkor had been largely abandoned in the 15th century when Phnom Penh became the capital city. In 1860, it was visited by the French explorer Henri Moore. Europe was enthralled by his sensational account of amazing temples and dramatic ruins cloaked in dense forest. When Buzy first approached Khan, he had promised to make Angkor a priority.
Angkor was a very prestigious site in that era. You were dealing with a set of ruins which could be compared to the Temple of Solomon. There was nothing comparable in the world. With all that history, all those memories preserved in its walls and temples, the archives of the planet just had to have it.
In February 1921, Buzy journeyed across the Mekong to get his first glimpse of the magnificent ruins of Angkor. His film and photographs depict an archetypal lost city, full of exotic statues and mysterious wall carvings. The tallest and best preserved building was called Angkor Wat, the temple of the city.
It has always been the symbol of Cambodia. This is the largest, the biggest, the most beautiful temple. You can hardly criticize when you see the general plan of Angkor Wat. If you are an architect, you can hardly find a failure. Everything is perfect.
Buzy took numerous pictures of Angkor Wat, but like many later photographers, he was also drawn to another temple built nearby, about 100 years later, the Bayon.
You had these enormous faces, 3 or 4 meters high it seems like, and there's maybe 70, and they're all looking in different directions. And it's this very kind of all-knowing, smiling face with these big eyes kind of looking out over the jungle. I think one of the challenges of photographing in Bayon is to try and get as many faces in the same frame. And I think in a couple of his photographs, he's been very clever to be able to find the right vantage point.
By 1921, French archaeologists had cleared many of the temples and were beginning the long process of restoration.
To start with, the priorities were very basics, clearing temples one by one. It was a task which was really challenging, very exciting one, because this is one of the largest archaeological sites in the world. They started to introduce restoration and I mean spectacular restoration where they rebuilt integrally some monuments which had previously completely disappeared.
In addition to the small army of Cambodians employed by the French to clear the site, Bussy found the lost city of Angkor to be a surprisingly busy place. His trip coincided with an official visit by a Siamese prince and his entourage. He photographed local boys fishing with bamboo baskets in a temple moat, and a Cambodian family in front of their country's most important monument. Inside Angkor Wat, he took dozens of portraits of monks. It was built to represent Mount Meru, which in Hinduism is the home of the gods. But over the centuries, Angkor Wat had become an important site for Cambodian Buddhists.
I guess that it can be a little bit like Muslim people who go to Mecca. You wish that at least once in your life you have to see Angkor Wat.
At Angkor Wat, Bussy encountered a troupe of Cambodian dancers. He was entranced. In Cambodia, dance was far more than entertainment. According to one founding myth, the Cambodian people were descended from the holy union of a hermit and a celestial dancer.
Dancers, in a way, are the link between the human and the divine. And the dance had a ritual function. For example, the Muni Mekala dance is actually a rain dance. It's a battle between a storm demon and a sea nymph, a sea goddess. And when thunder and lightning go at each other, it brings rain to nourish the rice fields of Cambodia.
Bussy carried on to Phnom Penh, where he filmed the king's own personal troupe. This unique film shows the royal ballet in rehearsal.
To have this material recorded, to see the exercises, is just amazing. Simply because no one would have seen them. No one except, literally, the dancers and the king.
In the 1970s, during the murderous rule of the Khmer Rouge, 90% of the dancers in Cambodia's royal ballet were either killed or exiled. The carnage almost destroyed a tradition which had lasted hundreds of years. Mte is one of the few dancers to have survived the turmoil of the Khmer Rouge era. Today she teaches in Phnom Penh, demonstrating to a new generation the skills Bussy photographed in the 1920s.
The training was very tough. The teacher was always hitting us, and they would pinch us and twist us in order to make us dance properly. You would spend the whole morning training to make your hands supple. They would get me to bend my fingers and then to do this and then to show this. The fingers curved like thorns on an orange tree.
All the members of the royal ballet lived within the palace compound in the quarters of the king's harem. The royal family itself was directly involved in training the dancers. Princess Bhupa Devi, sister to the present King of Cambodia, was one of the most famous dancers of the 1960s.
In those days, the dancers from the Royal Ballet were all one big family, and the king looked after that family. Everyone lived within the walls of the royal palace. Mothers with their children, and the skills and techniques were passed from mother to daughter, generation to generation.
The costumes worn by the dancers were hugely elaborate. It was a performance in itself just to get into them.
The corset had to be very tight. If it wasn't, it would be uncomfortable to dance it. A tight corset gave you a very straight back. If not, you would just slump. So the tighter the better, really. We didn't have zips or anything like that. Costumes were actually sewn onto the dancers.
By the time Buzy shot this film, the Cambodian Royal Ballet was already famous in Europe, after their performance at a festival of colonial art in France.
They got to Marseille and were just absolutely the knockout hit of the festival. They were performing indoors, and there were such riots of people trying to get in that they moved the performances outdoors, and they played for 30,000 people a night. There was a real appreciation that there could be true and brilliant art in one of these native places.
The French made an even more extravagant attempt to bring the culture of Indochina to Europe when they built this replica of Angkor Wat in Paris in 1931.
Millions of French people rushed to see the colonial exhibition, just to see Angkor Wat. You can still find old people who, when they talk about Cambodia, say, I saw Angkor at the colonial exhibition in 1931. I visited Angkor.